Welcome to the New Masculine Podcast. This is a place where masculine identifying people come together in community to disrupt outdated models of masculinity and together construct new models for our way forward as men. As a special note, while this conversation is between men, this podcast values all beings and seeks to create positive impacts for all. I'm your host, Travis Stock. I am a master life coach, an equus coach, which means I often partner with horses when supporting clients, and I'm a teacher. In my coaching work, I am passionate about the balance of masculine and feminine energies in each of us, regardless of gender. I seek to help others nurture a relationship with both types of energy, which often leads to a greater sense of wholeness. And yet what I found in my work with men is that many of us have been taught messages about what it means to be a man by first teaching us to avoid anything that is associated with the feminine. That avoidance leads to few experiences of intimacy, emotions outside of anger, vulnerability, or even a sense of belonging. Striving to comply with these models of masculinity has many of us feeling isolated, ashamed, unworthy, afraid, angry, and depressed. That's why I started this podcast, to bring men together who are ready for something new, something more whole. My next guest and I have previously only been separated by 1 degree in several of our shared relationships, but now it's time for us to connect. Luke Entrup is an executive coach, strategic advisor, and teacher whose journey with men's work started when he was 22 years old when he participated in his first men's group. And through his own development as a man, he has come to a universal truth he now shares through his work. And that is, you can only go as far in the world as you go deeply into your heart. No matter if you're seeking personal, professional, or spiritual change, you will need your heart. All of it. A major portion of his current work is a program called the Father-Son Connection Experience. This program is a rite of passage experience for boys ages 10 to 14 and their father figures and is designed to help boys navigate the shift from adulthood to the teen years and deepen the bond between fathers and their sons. As you can see, an important element of his work is creating healthy rites of passage and initiation for boys and men in a culture that has become less conscious of the importance of these experiences. Luke personally identifies as a father, as a coach, and as a guide. I'm really excited that Luke wanted to join us in the New Masculine, so let's welcome him in and learn from the path he has walked. Welcome, Luke.
Thank you so much, Travis. I'm thrilled to be here.
It's so great to have you. It was so fun to start to put the pieces together of some of the shared relationships we have and to get some recommendations from those friends of like, yeah, you should definitely have him on the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we've got some wonderful mutual friends, so really happy to be here.
Shout out to them. Is there anything else that you think is important for people to know before we jump into this conversation?
Oh, no, not at all. Just, I love what you're up to. Love what you're up to with the show. And I think these are the conversations that are needed more than anything else right now in our culture. So yeah, let's dive in, shall we?
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Super happy to jump in. So the place I always start with guys is to find out about them. Find out about your own journey from boyhood into manhood. As you have this, as we'll talk about later, you have this program called the Father-Son Experience, and you've been through your own journey from boyhood into manhood. And I'd love to hear any of the stories that come up for you when you think about the things that really shaped you, whether that's good, bad, indifferent, but just the stories that come to mind when you think about your journey from boy to manhood.
Yeah, absolutely. Such an important question. Let's start with the bad, unfortunately, and then maybe I'll share the good, because I think that's how the arc for most of us begins, is with some painful experiences, right? So as a kid, I was an actor. I loved being on stage. I loved performing and did all variety of acting and modeling and all the fun things of just making people inspired with my art. And I started that when I was 9 years old. And, as a young boy, I think some of the other boys didn't know what to do with me, because I was, had a lot of energy, got a lot of attention from the world. And that certainly shaped me. But some of the more formative experiences of what I learned about being a man, being a boy, came in the just pretty brutal bullying that I experienced, in kind of middle school, junior high, where just that part of me that was expressive and inspiring and could really feel emotions and kind of move them through my body, that was just judged very harshly, sometimes violently. And, this was 30 years ago, 30 some years ago in the Midwest, in a very kind of Catholic culture where there's a lot of one way to do things.
Mm-hmm.
And I never fit into that. Right. And so, part of what I learned in that was to just like be very careful about where I reveal myself, my expression, my heart, my truth, and shut down a lot of that part of myself in doing so. And I think this is like a pretty common experience for a lot of boys. I don't know if it's all, but a lot of boys have this experience of like needing to fit into a certain box about what it means to be a boy or a man. And at some point, that dream about being an actor, it wasn't the thing to do for me anymore. It kind of like faded out. And I found myself in this kind of the flatlands, right? A dull kind of flat life in my late teens and early 20s, and really felt lost and dropped out of college and was just kind of spinning my wheels, not much direction. And my father invited me to a men's weekend. And I have to say, this was like one of the most formative experiences of my life, to be surrounded by, in this case, it was 80 dudes, and they were all looking me in the eye, and I could feel from them like no BS. They were seeing deeper into me and calling something else out in me that was more than just my surface kind of personas. And in that, being surrounded by these men that were fierce, but also very loving, I could feel their heart. They cared about me. And they helped me understand that I have, it's possible to live a life of purpose and passion and a mission greater than yourself while still being really connected to your heart, your emotions, and being strong. And that was like kind of a pretty profound experience, right? To be surrounded by so many incredible men. And in that, on the kind of the last night of this particular experience, there was a ceremony around a fire in the woods. And I can very clearly say, before that ceremony, I was a boy, and an elder in this community presented me to the rest of these men and said, this, basically you're a man now. And I left feeling like, okay, this is what it means to be a man, connected to my feelings, in my power, and feeling a sense of purpose in my life. I can get behind this. And I went in a boy, I came out a man, and it profoundly changed my life.
It's so beautiful to know that some men are experiencing at such a young age that an actual like kind of rites of passage moment like that, where you get to sort of be inducted from boyhood into manhood and to go through an experience. And it's a couple things I was hearing when you were talking about that is like, we'll keep talking about this because I know this is an important part of your work, is that sort of rites of passage or initiation element. There's so few sort of like conscious and intentional versions of that in our culture. And yet one of the things that most of us go through is that adolescent phase where the rites of passage is the challenges of relating to other boys and to relating to our peers, and sort of the bullying and the shaming and the competition that's involved in trying to assess ourselves and assert ourselves as independent beings. And so many of us, I think I agree with you, go through those hardships where we then learn that there are parts of ourselves we either need to suppress, or there's other parts of ourselves that we need to heighten in order to belong and to fit in. And so we go through those experiences. And when we do that, it makes sense. You described your sort of like late teens and early young adult life as sort of dull and flat. It makes sense when you have recognized there's whole parts of yourself that are not safe to share in front of people, and people don't know what to do with them. And so you pull them back. It makes sense that in the consequence of that, or the just the natural impact that will have, is to dull and flatten your life emotionally, because the emotions are the things that we as men are supposed to hide from each other and act like we don't have. So I think that's really powerful to hear you describe the sort of journey you were on and sort of the impact it left you with that dull, flat life. And I bet a bunch of guys listening could actually really resonate with that dull, flat life, regardless of whether they're in their teen years, their early adult years, their middle life, their old years. Like many of us have experienced that dull, flat life that you discussed in your teens and early adulthood.
Yeah, I think it's a fairly common experience in this culture, right? And when we push those parts of ourselves that maybe it's been unsafe to reveal or show, when we push those into the shadows, we're also pushing a lot of our vitality and our life force and all of our creativity in there as well, right? So that's, I think, where that flatness comes. And when left unattended, I think we see the consequences over the lifespan, right? This is like where all of the, in my opinion, a lot of depression and anxiety and social isolation, it all kind of stems from this place of needing to kind of fit into a certain way of being and taking these, the author Robert Bly, he's a poet and author that writes about men's psychology. He talks about the human shadow being, we're born, he says 360 degrees of light. And if you've ever looked into a newborn's eyes, you see that, right? Like nothing but possibility in a newborn's eyes, right? And then the world tells us to be a certain way or not to be a certain way. And that 360 degrees, it starts to have little slivers kind of put in the darkness. And over time, more and more of that, we get formed and more of that ends up in the shadows until there's a moment when it's time, when the pain of it being in the shadows is greater than the risk of kind of showing up, that we turn around and we face those shadows and we start to metabolize them and figure out, kind of express them. And this is kind of the journey of initiation of a rite of passage. It's like facing some part of us in slaying our own dragons, or going on our own hero's journey, some sort of quest to reclaim some part of ourselves. And that's a really noble and courageous path. I would say it's the path of a warrior, right? Someone that's willing to face their own pain, their own sorrow, their own fear and loss, their own trauma, in order to become a better version of themselves.
I think that's what's been so healing for me as a man in the world, is to recognize. So in some ways, growing up as a gay man, I had this sort of association with the coming out process as what you're talking about. And it sort of felt like only gay people have to do it. But every time I talk to men, I find out that and anybody that I work with as a coach, we're all going through coming out processes. That's what that is learning to confront a part of ourselves that we have felt unsafe to expose, bringing the shadow out into the light. That's what that process was for me. And to recognize that we're all going through that process and that there's a shared human experience of it. It may be for different reasons. It may not be because of sexuality, but it could be your belief systems. It could be your values. It could be the type of relationship you want in your life. It could be you're super spiritual and woo-woo and your family doesn't respect that. Like it can be any of those parts of our lives, or our sensitivity as men is one of those big things. Is like so many of us are really sensitive little boys at our heart. And to come out and just claim that and say that, and to be able to develop a relationship with that sensitivity and that emotionality can be really scary, but we all have to go through that. And we don't have to, but there's an invitation to do so. And many of us do choose to take the leap over that threshold that felt so scary for a long time. And I just appreciate you sharing it in that way, because it makes me feel like my own journey isn't less of because I'm a gay man. It means that we're men and we go through these things, and that we have these moments of life where we have to cross a threshold that is scary as hell.
Yeah.
And as you said, in like that first experience with a men's group, when men's groups are done well, you do feel all that heart, but there is a lack of BS. And that's really disorienting if you've never experienced that, because there's so much BS in our socializing with each other out there in the world that to go into a group of conscious men who are not going to hold that is pretty disorienting.
Yeah. Well, there's this idea out there that the feminine in all of us grows through praise, and the masculine in all of us grows through challenge, right? And so what's it like when we can have both, right? We can have the part of us that is emotive and emotional and expressive, that's honored through praise and recognition, and the part of us that is can really see and is still and steady, that we also can have the relationship with our brothers, where they will call us out and say, deeper, you can do better than this, you're better than this. For me, I need both, right? Yeah. I really do.
Well, there's research to back that up. Like if you go into like something like student development theory that talks about like how college age students best move through the college level programs, is they need the research says that they need the right balance of challenge and support. If you make it, if there's too much support, then they don't do anything on their own. They don't stretch. They don't grow. They're not challenged to stretch into something. But if there's too much challenge, they bail out and they abandon the whole thing. And so you need that right balance of challenge and support. I think most of us, or all of us, need that. And we as men are kind of socialized to really value the challenge and to only want that and to reject the support. But there are plenty of guys that also really just want the support without the challenge. And so I think that's a really positive sort of exploration for us to talk about, is that sort of, we need both. Those are both important nutrients to our development as people.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to go back just for a moment about this piece about the coming out process, right? And how that, I think there's an ingredient in there that you're pointing to that might be helpful just to name, which is any sort of transformational experience that we have, or some sort of developmental shift that we go through as humans, or I might even say rite of passage, a transition from one way of being into the other. When done well, there's this ingredient of community, of communion, of coming together, right? And partly what I'm hearing, I kind of curious if this fits for you, but like part of the coming out process for gay men is that there's it's the community element, the sense of belonging, right? And that sense of belonging is so much of what we're looking for in humans, whether it's, a gay man coming out, or a boy becoming a teenager, or a teenager becoming a man, or, this is what so many of us are looking for in, sports clubs and the theater and, joining the band or the orchestra. There's a sense of like, I fit, I belong, I'm part of the tribe. And it's like, it's pretty deep. It's hardwired into us, I would say. It's like a survival mechanism as humans. We're so highly social creatures that we will do just about anything to belong. And when done well, these rites of passage include an element of, kind of becoming part of some community that's greater than ourselves. And it's shepherded by elders, by those that have already walked that path. There's like these wisdom keepers that help the new ones along. And so, I think, maybe there's this map that may apply to the coming out process as well, around just initiation, right? It is an initiation. It is a rite of passage.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Like there is that sort of driving towards community and driving towards belonging to something, but at least in the coming out process for a gay man, and I think this, as I think about it, it might apply to all of these transformational experiences, because there's risk involved. It's like we almost have to confront losing community. I may have to lose everyone that I have surrounded myself with, because they may reject me for this thing that I've been afraid to show them, in the search of true belonging. And so I love that you're bringing up that word belonging so much. I'm reading this book called Belonging, Remembering Ourselves Home by Tokapa Turner. I'm rereading it. And so much of what she talks about is how much effort most of us are doing to fit in versus to belong. And that fitting in is that sort of whittling away essential and authentic parts of ourselves to gain access to other people and to be accepted by. And yet the harm of that is we no longer belong to ourselves. And so therefore we can never truly really belong in any space. And I found that to myself as a gay man was the more and more I tried to fit in and to be what it was, the more and more I divorced from my own sense of belonging I was in. And then no matter that I was surrounded by people, I didn't ever feel like I belonged. I felt always on the outskirts. I felt always the threat of it going away. And it wasn't until I was willing to risk losing community that I really gained that sense of belonging. And I think that's true of all of these rites of passage. There is a risk to stepping forward into more wholeness, into more authenticity. There's a reason we learn to separate those parts of ourselves away. And so there's a risk to it. And so we have to take that risk, take that leap, and see what happens on the other side.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a necessary part. I mean, so Joseph Campbell wrote about the hero's journey, right? Which I think is a great map and model around rites of passage. And in the hero's journey, the first step is, this separation, right? The descent. First step is to separate from the known world. All great myths and stories and legends about the heroes of old, they all leave the comforts of home. And that's maybe a bit of what you're saying is like, we have to be willing to cast away. We need to be willing to cast away the known, even if it's painful, even if those relationships hurt, there's connection there, right? We need to be willing to cast those away and then descend into the truth of our own heart. The second stage is the ordeal, right? And this is the slaying of the dragon, the facing of the fears, this is the moment of truth where some heroes don't actually make it back. This is their end. There's peril, there's danger. Often there are unexpected allies along the way, but in the end, it's me facing my fear. And then the third stage is the return, right? Coming back into some community that where we have a chance to tell the story of who we are now. And this is the arc of all great legends and stories, right? And so perhaps this story also fits to the coming out process. Yeah,
for sure. And I'd love to continue hearing about your story as you've returned back. Like, we've heard about the rites of passage of you, like sort of the challenging aspects of adolescence and leaving behind something that was nourishing at one point, sort of the acting and the modeling piece of things, and leaving that behind, stepping into adulthood in that men's group and that at the age of 22. What other sort of rites of passages or battles have you faced throughout your journey?
Yeah. Great question. So some major ones, becoming a parent. It's just been, a total crucible of transformation, and talk about like letting go of old ways of being, becoming a parent. There's nothing like it. And marriage was a big one. And then probably the more significant one was divorce, going through a marriage ending, and all of the feelings and the like shattering of identity and really, there's something about the safety and security kind of socially around being married that when that goes away, it's kind of ripe for projection of other people and really kind of confronting around, who I believed myself to be, right? And it really forced me to get very honest about what was most important to me and what was essential about how I identify, as a man, and as someone that takes great pride in stability and integrity and all of these things. I have to say, the period of like divorce and the year or two that followed was absolutely the most transformational few years of my life because of that, because it's the groundlessness, right? The unmasking of personas, the need to radically face one's truth and to feel one's emotions deeply in order to have certainty. Tremendous rite of passage for me.
Yeah, I think that's been my experience, and I talk about that a lot with my clients. Is there's the ego, and much of us is inclined to move towards certainty, to have the new identity, to hang the coat on the coat rack, to know what that is, to say that I am a coach, I am a social worker, I am married, it wants those things. But there are disruptors in our lives that take us out of certainty and put us into that liminal space, the in between. And that's really hard for many of us. The ego doesn't like that. We struggle in those spaces, many of us, because of that lack of grounding you talked about. And yet, in my experience, is also where the most magic happens in our lives, when we are not scripting everything and holding on to something good or bad for us, and that we're actually allowing ourselves to really co-create with life, to like stop arguing with reality of how it should be and start living it as it is. That's like where so much of the magic comes from.
Absolutely. Yeah. The Tibetans have this concept of the bardo, right? Which is, so there's a belief in the Tibetan culture around reincarnation, right? And so when the body dies, the soul enters this liminal space called the bardo, and then there's some period of time, and then that soul is reborn into the next body. But in the bardo, it's this place to like burn off all of the karma of the previous life. There's this, as you say, like liminality where we can see possibility about our next incarnation. And habitually, if we use this kind of metaphorically, right, like habitually we want to just like grasp onto the next life that we're entering into, and we want to kind of like fast forward the tape and get there as quick as possible, because that liminality can be very uncomfortable. But we also miss the opportunity to burn off some of those past ways of being, and to kind of metabolize some of the clutter of our past incarnation. And we may actually miss some possibility about who we're becoming if we just grasp and reach and grasp to the next thing prematurely. So, there's this, it's a practice, right? To hang out in uncertainty, to hang out in the unknown, to make the most of these times between lifetimes, right? And for me, that's like, there's a lot of structural things I can do. And when I'm coaching people, I encourage them to do around, this is a good time to retreat, go on retreats, be held by other people, other guides, other coaches, therapists, right? This is the time to do the deep work when we're in these in-between times, whether we've lost a job or a loved one or a marriage or whatever it is, a hope and a dream, that we pause and we actually do the work then, and call in all the help and support that we need, and create time on our calendar so that we're not just habitually grasping the next incarnation. We've actually done it a bit more intentionally.
I love that invitation to, in the place of uncertainty, to find some pillars of certainty, some things that can hold you as you kind of drift and find your way through it. And I always encourage people, that's a great time to use the word, the things that you might habitually grab for, is like, that's such a great time to unhabituate, to bring consciousness to your choices, to your actions, to your belief systems, to your thoughts, to your relationship to self, and unhabituate them, bring them into consciousness so that you can decide, is this really serving me, or is this holding me back? Is this thing that was once the comfort zone still comfortable, or is it limiting me so much that I am now boxed into something? You talked about becoming a father, becoming married, divorce also as sort of important rites of passages. What were the things that you, in stepping in and out of those identities, that you metabolized, that said, okay, that part of me, while got me here, is no longer serving me moving forward? And so, like, what did you metabolize and what did you create from those experiences?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think becoming a parent is this, there's this very confronting aspect to the ego about, like, there's before kids and after kids. Before kids, if I have an impulse or an inclination that something on my journey as a human will support that, I could follow that, right? Like, for example, I think I really need to go live in Costa Rica for 6 months and, surf and be in the jungle and refine my meditation practice. And I don't know, sit with plant medicine and do the things, like, no problem, go do that. Right. That would help me evolve as a human. I can go do that. Once those babies come, like, something changes, right? Where that becomes so much more difficult. Now, it's still important to like find time for ourselves, right? I'm not talking about dismissing our own needs, but that initial impulse, it is most often not possible because the focus of the ego now is on the survival and thriving of the children, right? And so their needs actually get put first over my kind of self-centered, in the sense, selfish, not in the negative sense, but self-centered needs. And so there's this shift in identity from me to you, and maybe a little bit of me. And that gets easier over time as they get a little older, but it's incredibly confronting. And so that part of like that, just being able to just follow on a whim whatever I think would be best for my own journey, that's the part that really had to dissipate, and I had to redefine my own journey around what it meant to essentially be a good man and be a conscious man. So much more about the little moments, the minute moments with my children and my partner around, modeling the type of person that I wanted to be. And of course, failing miserably often. I think that's part of it as well. There's this thing about being a parent where there's this constant gap between the parent I thought I would be and the parent I actually am.
That's so relatable.
Right? I think it's a very common experience as parents, right? That we have all these ideas about what it would mean to be a good father. And then the reality hits and it's like, it's so much more difficult than we thought. And there's a constant opportunity for improvement, and also a constant opportunity to avoid shame spirals and other things, right? So I think that's, those are some key identity things for me that really had to transition.
And then what about after your divorce? Like, what did that teach you about the man you wanted to become, and who, like, the next iteration of you as a man?
Yeah, it's a great question. For me, I think, for me personally around that, I really saw in my divorce, like how I let things happen over years in the marriage that I didn't take full responsibility for keeping the marriage thriving and healthy, and I just got really lazy in the relationship. And of course she had her own part in it. Like, it was this beautiful, ugly matching of our own kind of background and programming. But for me, it was really falling asleep. And what I took from that experience is, like, I will never fall asleep like that again, right? Like, I will stay awake. I will do whatever it takes to cultivate deep connection in my intimate relationship, and that I will be a fierce stand for, doing whatever it takes to live with a full heart, and just being a good partner, right? And so that's something that I've taken, is just being a stand for cutting through, having uncomfortable conversations, cutting through BS in relationship, and doing whatever I can to be a good partner, a good lover, a good ally, friend, support. So
I appreciate you sharing that, because I think that I can imagine a lot of men have had that experience in a primary relationship, a romantic relationship, where it's just easy to go to sleep, to become kind of lazy, to become complacent in it. And relationships are things that require consistent nutrients, and they're whatever our actions are either adding to or subtracting to from the trust, or in the relationship, or the sense of safety with each other, or the wellness of the relationship. And I think oftentimes it's easier to go on autopilot and take those things for granted, that because it once worked, it will always work. And I think that the invitation in your own journey for all of us is to stay awake, to stay conscious within our relationships, and recognize what our work is within relationships is to stay conscious, is to stay awake. And I say that with a lot of compassion because I've been recently talking with a lot of people about it's pretty hard to be human right now. Like there's a lot of stuff going on in our world. There's a lot of political unrest. There's a lot of racial reckoning. There's a lot of division. There's a lot of people feeling alienated by those in power or by those who aren't in power. There's a lot of stuff going on in our culture right now, like especially in the US, but I think it's happening worldwide too. And men are feeling really isolated, but men are also feeling really attacked at the same time. And so there's a lot of reasons that people will go unconscious, will numb out, will disconnect and not stay engaged in it. And yet there is power when we are able to find our people, those we belong with, and to consistently show up in those relationships, because those are where we have the most power, that which is right in front of us, rather than using those outside forces that are challenging to sit with and to watch and to observe and to participate in. But instead of using those as reasons to disconnect, it's like, how do we find the places where we can intentionally stay connected and continue to build that feeling state that we really want from our lives?
Yeah, so well said. And there's this possibility, I believe, in our intimate relationship or relationships that this is the place where we can grow the most as a human, right?
I think that's their purpose.
Exactly.
In my experience.
Right. And so the way that I love my partner is there's ways I can learn about how to be a better father, or what type of leader I am in the world, and how my work, how I'm perceived by others in the world. There's this way that it can become the container for our own evolution, right? That's the possibility. And so, why not use it as such, right? To that's the place where we can do our deepest work, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, it is sort of like we have this interesting experience as humans of being in individual and separated bodies, but having that sort of hardwired need for connection and belonging and gathering together and lowering the boundaries together. And romantic relationships are or even being a parent, are such a primary example of being two individuals whose boundaries are lowered so that our lives can be combined. And inevitably in there's going to be conflict. There's going to be needs that are in conflict with each other, or like it feels like mine can't get met and theirs does. And there's a rubbing together that there's a friction that's really important in relationships that helps us expand and grow and evolve, and can be our best teachers if we can find those kinds of relationships that are actually psychologically safe enough to do so. Obviously not all relationships can last, and the goal is not to just like sit in the torture of it all if it's not really working, but sometimes the hardness or the challenges of a relationship are the training grounds for us that help us really see ourselves and see how we're perceived, see the gap between what we intend to create and the impact that we're having on the external environment as a man. They can be so powerful. So I appreciate you sharing that, because I think sometimes we just take relationships like that for granted. Like they're just marriage. That's what you do in life, is you get married. But what happens when you stay awake to their potential and to their purpose in our lives, and how they're trying to support us as a soul, as a being?
Yeah, absolutely. This is, yes. So well said. This is the possibility of what relationship can be.
Mm-hmm. So you've got your own experiences of it, but I know that your work is really focusing currently on sort of one type of relationship, which is that father-son relationship, and you're leading rites of passage experiences for teen boys and their fathers. And so I'd love to hear a little bit more about that work and about why you're feeling called to do that and what guys can expect from that work.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, this is really about honoring and recognizing the transition from childhood into adolescence. So there's several stages in a boy, the path from boyhood to manhood, right? There's two very significant transitions. One is from as childhood to adolescence, and that's kind of the 10 to 14 age, which is what we're recognizing. And then there's the passage into manhood, which is about 17 to 20, we would say. Right. And I think we can all kind of feel there's a difference, right, in those two stages. the what's happening at 10 to 14 is obviously the body's changing, right? Puberty's starting to kind of begin, and there is this very strong desire for kind of two ingredients. One is to begin to have some sort of kind of mastery or excellence in something, usually something physical. So we see this is where like music becomes really important, or sports teams, or for me, it was like, getting into theater about that age. And there's a focus on getting really good at something. And in doing that, there's a sense of belonging, right? A sense of feeling part of a community. And that's really that, sports teams and clubs and, art, that we were part of something greater than ourselves. And then the second one is just, it's more about my identity in the world, right? The passage into manhood is like, who am I? What kind of man am I? So our program is really focused on the first one. And the key ingredient that we're working is the connection between the father and the son, right? Like how we know things are going to get hard during the teenage years. What can we do to establish the strongest bond as possible between the father and the son, so that when things get dicey, which they will, the father is at least one person that the boy knows he can turn to. Maybe not for everything, but that we really want to strengthen that bond, and we want to honor that passage, that rite of passage. So we do a program where we take boys and their dads out into the wilderness. They have a couple of hikes, a day, an hour or two, just the two of them alone in the woods, so they can have some deeper conversations. We do a lot around emotional awareness. We teach about emotions. We teach about the concept that we talked about at the top of the show around the shadow. We do some emotional healing work, boys and their dads together. And then there's an element of discomfort, right? Like we do some training. We do some what we call warrior training, which is like doing some things, light movement, yoga, meditation, light martial arts, optional cold exposure, jumping into cool mountain streams or ice baths to really face the what we want the boys to leave feeling like, I did something really hard and I wasn't sure if I could do it, and I did it, and I'm stronger for it, right? So the idea is like open heart, strong spine, really fully embodied as young warriors. And then the last night we do a ceremony where the fathers honor the boys of their passage into adolescence. We've got a few surprises and elements to that make it really special, where the boys leave feeling like, I'm now on my path to being a teenager. And we hope in this, my vision for this, I have a 12-year-old boy, right? And my vision, like where this really came from, was I wanted to give him an experience of honoring his passage into this preteen, teen era. And the picture in my mind always was, we were surrounded by some of my favorite dudes, buddies in my life, and maybe there are boys as well. And we're around a fire, and he's getting to hear, what does it mean to be a good man in the world from these other men that I really trust? And so we kind of crafted this whole experience, frankly, so that my son and other sons, other boys, could have this experience of like sitting around a fire together, hearing from other men that are trustworthy, have high integrity, are accountable, are doing great work in the world, understand their emotions, have faced their own failures, fears, doubts, wounds of the past, and have come through it stronger and clearer. What does it mean to walk that kind of path? And what does it mean to be a man in the world today? And because that is definitely changing, right? Like, what is it? The male identity is in this constant update mode, which is great, needs to happen, right? And so, what does it mean to live to be a good man these days? And then the final ingredient is on the last day. We bring in a sex educator, and we talk about changing bodies. We do a thing around basic anatomy, and then an open Q&A where everybody writes their questions about sex on a card, and a very sex positive point of view around, very kind of accepting point of view from the sex educator answers these questions. And that's been just one of my favorite, most delightful parts of this whole experience is hearing some of the questions that the boys have or the dads have. And, we just do it for about an hour and then we immediately send them out into the woods with their dads and let their dads take it from there. But it's a way to just open the conversation.
I love that you're creating spaces for the unhad kinds of conversations. There's so few spaces where we as men and boys can talk about our fears, our struggles, what we've learned, what our value systems are around being a good man. Like the real forms of connection typically in our culture around for men is sports, drinking at a bar. Like there's not that many of those like campfire moments where we get to really have those intentional conversations, and including our like healthy sexual development and sex positivity for young boys. I think many of us can remember sitting in health class in junior high school and having all those awkward questions being asked and the giggles and stuff. But to be there in a space where we don't have to feel ashamed, where we can have those conversations and be curious about ourselves is super powerful. And I really love the element that you were saying, like you created it because you wanted it for your son. I love when we're all creating from the things that we're most invested in. That's what this podcast is for me. It's like, it's not just about the change I want to see in the outside world. It's really about my own healing journey as a man. It's sort of the reclamation of my own self and my own wisdom, where I had long thought, based on what I learned from my culture, that I had failed as a man from the moment I came into this world because I'm gay. And sort of stepping forward into a conversation that I didn't know I was really welcome to, or that I didn't know that I would be received well in, and saying, no, I think I have something to offer. I think my rites of passages, the learning that I've been on, has something to share. And I'd like to gather with other men and have us share together, have those sort of campfire conversations about what we've learned, what we value, what's been hard, those kinds of things, so that we're doing what you're doing with those boys and those fathers. We're doing here so that other people can listen to that too, because so many guys missed out on an opportunity like you're offering, where it's a healthy rites of passage. And so these kinds of conversations can be the entrance way into that for some other people. So I love that you're creating based on what you're personally invested in, because you're going to do it really well because you're that invested in it.
Yeah. I think some of the best offerings that anybody, this is the way to, as you say, just create from our passion. You're talking, you touched on something that I want to name, which is, there's this habitual way of relating that we get into, especially as parents with our children and children with parents. And we have to shake that up. We have to and I think actually one of my jobs as a father is to pull my children out of their daily narrow-minded, myopic, self-centered point of view, to pull them out of that occasionally and show them something new about the world or a way of being, right? Like this for me has looked like taking my kids on trips, like making that a priority. Like I want to show you different parts of the world or different parts of different cultures, so that you see it helps you understand your place in the world, but also develops a lot more empathy and compassion for other people and other people's way of being, right? I regularly take my children out into the wild, backpacking trips, long hikes. We've gotten into some pretty sketchy, dangerous things together. And this is all part of I want to put you in discomfort, and I want you to feel something. I want you to see something different and feel something different. This program is also in that vein. It's to help fathers pull the relationship out of the doldrums, out of the grooves, out of the ruts that we get into, and shake it up and have different types of conversations and connect in a new way. Often this means as parents, like actually going into a deep place of curiosity about our children's life and their way of being. It's less about telling them about this is what it means to be a good man. It's less about that, or this is what I expect from you as a teenager, and more about, tell me what's important to you at this stage in your life. What are you struggling with? Like, help me understand your doubt, your places where you get anxious. And so it's really more of an invitation for the children to open up, the boys to open up. And like I said, for the fathers to be there in a new way. And I think any relationship needs this like shaking up, this pulling it out of the habitual patterns, but especially during these inflection points in transition periods of life, when the body starts changing, it's a really good time to pull that relationship out of its patterns and go out into the wild, go out into the forest for a weekend. And whether it's with this program or just doing that on your own, I think it's really important.
It sounds like you're really, in all of the work that you're doing, you're really infusing it with what we were talking about earlier, that balance of challenge and support. There's that challenging, but also that sort of ceremony at the end where the men get to honor their sons. And so there's like this balance of the two, which can really help a young boy develop to start to learn how to develop that mastery you talked about. Like, I can do hard things. I can do things I didn't think I could do once, but also with the support of the father there, that's also going to be a part of the challenge, but is also there to catch them, to know that they're there, to see them in an intimate way, to not buy into that teenage desire to pull in and to disconnect, but to like continue saying, no, I see you. It's super powerful to hear that. And I love to know that there are these, that you value both of those in the men's work that you do. Sometimes they're so focused, like they can be, for me, I've witnessed they can be so focused on the warrior that they don't offer the support, or they can be too like soft and too unable to like actually help someone develop a sense that's really appropriate at that time frame. Like, that is such a developmental stage where they're meant to be kind of myopic and self-centered. And it's a very normal part of the development of an adolescent.
That's
right. That doesn't mean that they can't also see more than that. And so those moments where you say you pull them out of that and help them see something beyond themselves, to see their own discomfort going into other kinds of experiences, I think is super powerful in the development from that kind of normal developmental stage, which is very self-centered and self-focused, and I'm the only one on stage, and I'm that kind of element that is so that many of us can remember from our adolescent years, but to pull us out and to help us meet the world. Because I think, and sometimes when there's not enough of that challenge in those early years, it's not really setting up the young adults for success going forward, because life will throw things that are challenging and hard at you. And if you've never had to learn to navigate that and to regulate your nervous system and to lean into support where it's available to you, then you're going to be kind of isolated out there alone and not with any tools or resources for how to make it through that.
Yeah, it's so well said. And I just, you're speaking to kind of where a lot of this came from in me, right? I want to name one thing, which is there's a way in which we, as a culture, we often celebrate results. And in some ways, it does a disservice at this stage in life, right? It's so much more about effort and kind of the effort put in process. And, there's this collapse that happens, I think, in children, especially around this age, that's easy to, like, if we're hyper focused on results and we're not so focused on the effort, it's much easier for children to collapse, or anybody to collapse, when the result gets hard or isn't possible, right? There's a collapse that can happen. A lot of what we can do as parents and just as adults in children's lives is to really honor, celebrate, and encourage the effort. And because that is how we teach this fortitude, this stick-with-itness, the strength that you're referencing, that has at times gone a bit missing in our culture, is de-emphasize the outcome at this stage in life and really focus on effort. As part of that, one of the things that we've been reframing in this particular program that I think is important is just the idea that emotions, our feelings, are and our ability to express it is a form of bravery and strength, right? We're reframing this message that if I have a feeling, it's a sign of weakness. This is like the classic male BS.
Yeah, we all heard that story.
right. That any sort of emotion is a form of weakness, right? Reframing that it takes a warrior to turn in and face his own heart, his own doubt, his own fear, his own pain. And that effort of turning in is one of the most courageous things you could do and is a source of your strength. It is possible to feel your feelings, express your feelings, let other people know where you stand, to feel someone else's feelings. And that's at times the strongest thing you could ever do. And it doesn't mean that if we feel our feelings, we collapse. It means that, there's a sense of strong spine, open heart in that. So
that's so important as like the title of this podcast being the new masculine. Like that is such an important and vital part of the new masculine, that ability to reframe some of those old stories, to disrupt those old ones that many of us internalized and had to really work within, of our weaknesses, in having our feelings. And I agree with you that that's such a powerful time frame to be shifting our focus out of results and performance and moving it into effort and into what it takes to move through these things, that more of a developmental approach to raising our children, especially with boys, because I find so much of our socialization as boys is to how to win, how to perform, how to defeat, how to conquer. And in the long run, which that teaches us, is that others around us are objects in our way. They're not other people with just as important of values and needs. It doesn't teach us to understand the power of our community and belonging. It teaches us to really focus on winning. And it's not to say that results are a bad thing, but it does, when that is the only thing you have access to. We get to see a lot of those uninitiated men in the world in our current culture, where they are focused on winning at all costs, and they don't necessarily notice the ripple of chaos they create around them and the harm that they do. And so it's like helping someone really turn inward and feel their own feelings and be able to feel someone else's feelings and not run away from that or see those as signs of weakness, that helps somebody be a more whole being, that can not only have desires and claim our values and go after what we really want, but also can stay connected to the people around them.
Yeah, you're here. Absolutely.
I'm so glad that you're creating spaces for that, because there needs to be disruptors. Not like I'm often having conversations with men, and some of them are doing work with boys and teenagers. But so much of what we're talking about is once we've already been socialized in those ways, but maybe we will have a bigger bang for our buck if we start learning to socialize boys that understand both effort, results, development, kindness, and the ability to go after what you want. Like maybe we would have a lot of positive impact if we can really interrupt some of those early developmental patterns that we're teaching.
Yeah. I mean, let's imagine a world, right, where every boy has the opportunity to have a meaningful mentorship and rite of passage into healthy masculinity. What would that world look like? That would be a world where I would want to live. I think most of us we can see that world. And, while things were different from a kind of like Maslow's hierarchy of need, there was a time in human history when most cultures were initiating their boys into manhood, right? And we've lost that. This is one of the great harms of the Industrial Revolution and kind of this move towards urbanization and just population explosion. We culturally lost those cultures that live closer to the land have always had, which is honoring the cycles of life and honoring these major moments of passage in one's life. And we see the cost, as you say, of like we are now a species that is largely led by uninitiated men, boys. We're a culture led by boys, seeking belonging and seeking ego identity. What if we took the next 200 years and we focused on initiating boys into healthy masculinity and these ideas of that we're talking about of living a life of service to our community, emotional integrity, strength, fortitude? What would that world look like? And I think it's possible, right? Like it is possible. So we're on this multi-generational journey of reintroducing these meaningful rites of passage back into our culture.
I mean, I love imagining it. My whole body sort of relaxes as I imagine sort of that future reality of what we're creating through conversations like this and through work that you're doing. And I really love that. I never really thought of it that way. But as you were saying, like as we've industrialized and urbanized, like so much of the human pathway, so like in the last centuries, has been about stepping outside of the rhythms of the world and nature and life and conquering it. So we're no longer a part of the food chain. We're no longer a part. We don't have to, we can work, we can have shift work that has nothing to do with the daylight that's outside. We can, not have to deal with sort of the normal rites of passages that would happen in the natural world. And so we've removed ourselves and controlled all those elements. But what have we lost by doing so? It's like in some ways it's helped society progress in some ways, but in other ways we've lost a lot. And I love that sort of coming back into the rhythm with life, allowing life to be, there's a rhythm that's going on and we don't have to have a separate one that's completely disconnected from it. What happens when we align with that rhythm of life? So I love that element that you're bringing up.
Yeah. And, it's possible, those of us that do live in cities, it just takes a bit of effort to really, feel the seasons change and taking time to get out of the city and be in the forest, or, it takes an effort. It's a practice in and of itself, but the earth is always speaking to us if we're willing to listen.
That's why part of my coaching work that I love doing is bringing people out, and I do experiential learning with horses. It's called equus coaching. And so like get people out in with a being that doesn't speak the same language as you, out in nature, in a relationship with a being that understands the power of community and that understands that being an isolated member of the herd is the least safe place to be. And so when we get to see another being that really values that, has a huge emotional capacity that might be different than ours, but is large in capacity, we get to look and reflect on like how separate we've become from the natural world. And we get to let our heart rhythms sync up with another being. We get to let our nervous systems intertwine with a being that's very sensitive but powerful all at the same time. And so I love the invitation that there are so many different ways we can do that, but that's the one that I found. And it sort of really aligns with what you're talking about of like, feel what's happening out there, like really connect with it. Don't just take it for granted and stay separate from it. Feel what's out there. Find that rhythm.
Feel, for me, it's like this practice around wonderment and awe, right? It's a choice. Wonderment and awe are a choice that I make to allow myself to avail my heart to looking up at the night sky and taking in the terror of how vast things truly are, and be in a place of complete wonderment. That's a practice for me, right? To avail myself to the nourishment of the natural world, to sit under a tree and feel the energetic nutrition that is available to me, to breathe in the forest air and all of the prana, the chi, the life force that's available there, to let myself be washed over by the waves in the ocean, or the mist from the ocean, and allow that to cleanse myself. There's constantly this nutrition, this nourishment, this possibility when we avail ourselves, when we open ourselves up to the earth in this way.
Beautifully said. And you may have covered it by sharing that, but I also like to always give guys at the very end of our conversation some one last chance. If there's a piece of advice, a piece of offering, an invitation, something you'd like to leave men with, what might that be?
I think actually, in this conversation, I'm struck by the importance of surrounding ourselves by other men who we feel will make us a better version of ourselves. Right. If there's one thing that has helped me grow as a man, as a human, as a father, more than anything else, it's been the other men in my life who have been cheering me on and have also been telling me, looking me in the eye and saying, you can do better than this, deeper, brother. And to put myself in men's groups, in men's circles, to reach out to make new friends that are men that I know would make me a better man. that can take a lot of different forms. But that's been the thing in my life when I think about what's helped me grow the most and feel most alive and grounded on this path of manhood. It's been surrounding by other men.
Such an important and often missing nutrient in many of our lives. So thanks for that invitation, and thanks for coming in recently as one of those men for me. I hope that I offer the same back to you through this conversation. If people wanted to learn more about the work you're doing in the world, anything that's beyond the father-son connection experience or anything else you're doing in the world, how might they find you? And is there anything else you'd like to plug?
Sure. Yeah. So the Rites of Passage program is called the Father-Son Connection Experience. We have several weekend retreats coming up. And we also have a week-long backpacking trip up in the North Cascades next summer. Kind of up by you, I think. Right?
Close to me.
Yeah. So we're taking a group out for a
Beautiful.
week next summer. That's at fathersonconnection.com, Father-Son Connection Experience. The website is fathersonconnection.com. And then I also do a lot of leadership coaching. I coach leaders through transitions and helping them scale their own leadership and culture. And you can find out more about that at evolution.team.
Okay. I'll make sure that those are in the show notes so that people can easily access them. Thank you so much, Luke, for coming on here, for sharing your perspective, for helping us reclaim the importance of rites of passage, and for helping, even through your own story, helping me connect to my story and helping me find in the part of me that still needs to find the common humanity instead of the isolation and the separation, the hurt parts of me. Thank you for sharing your story and allowing me to connect with that, which then helps me find safety for those parts of myself that still feel kind of separate and isolated. So thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Appreciate you having me on.
Yeah. If you want to connect with me, you can go to my website at travisstock.com. You can also find me on Instagram at Travers03. That's where a lot of the ongoing conversations of this podcast are going on. So if you want to keep the conversation going, please find me there. And if you are enjoying the mission of this podcast and like to support, I'm on Patreon at patreon.com/themasculine. Thanks again, Luke, for joining me. And until our next episode.